Hello and welcome to this current affairs session. Today we are going to discuss some of the aspects related to mains examination for current affairs. So in this particular session we are going to discuss three analytical topics that predominantly form a part of the international relations GS paper 2, but one of them also has a bearing on the internal security as well. Okay, so stay tuned and at the same time stay very focused in this particular lecture so that you can be appreciating and understanding the background of the entire story which has actually evolved and subsequently how is it you can say going further in order to understand the way that the things have developed. Okay, तो आज के हम इस सेशन में बात करने वाले हैं तीन ऐसे टॉपिक्स के बारे में जहां पे आप पूरी तरीके से अपने आप को फोकस करके रखना, क्योंकि ये आपके टॉपिक्स इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस के लिए तो इंपॉर्टेंट हैं ही, बट इनमें से जो टॉपिक्स हैं वो आपके इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी से भी रिलेटेड है. सो व्हाट वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड इज दैट in order to write a good answer we need to know the various facets of the discussion. Okay, तो इस डिस्कशन में हम वही काम करने वाले हैं. So if you are new to the channel, please like, share and subscribe. If you are the ones who are already with us, so I welcome you to another session of ours. Those who have not yet you can say joined or followed our channel, there are also other videos which you can see, and there is a sequence of these videos that basically help you understand about the various current affairs events that have happened recently. So our job here is to make the current affairs journey easy for you. Your job is to just read the newspaper. Our job is to make it readable for you. Okay, so that is how we are going to collaborate. We'll be solving certain questions, we'll be doing certain quizzes, and subsequently in that particular manner we would want you to take this Herculean journey of current affairs as an enjoyable one. Okay, and let me assure you that when you're done with your current affairs portion, when you gain sufficient confidence, there is nothing that can beat you with respect to being smart in the room. Okay, so let us begin this particular session with that particular aspect in our mind. So today we are going to discuss three very important topics. The first one we are going to discuss is the Chabahar port. Okay, so Chabahar port is one of the most important investments of India overseas. Okay, so it is basically related to your paper 2, that is GS paper 2, international relations, the relation of India with neighboring countries. Apart from that, it is also about how the politics or the policies of the developed and developing countries affect India's interests. That is exactly what we are going to talk about in Chabahar port. And apart from that, this is also one of the part of the infrastructure that basically is a part of GS3. Okay, now the second topic that we are going to discuss is basically a defense pact that has been signed between the Royal Kingdom of Saudi Arabia with Pakistan. Now this particular topic has got a serious implication for internal security with respect to India. Apart from that, we are going to discuss the various contours of the defense cooperation between the two countries. And finally, we will be ending up with one of the most complex geopolitical disputes of modern time, and that is the South China Sea. Okay, so South China Sea represents a very volatile situation most of the time. So there have been some recent controversies again. So we will be considering what exactly is the you can say claim of various countries here, and subsequently we will be trying to understand why this is such a big you can say controversy amongst the countries. Okay, so let us begin this particular session. Pay very close attention to the story that I am going to tell you. So the first one is basically Chabahar port. Chabahar port is basically a port in Iran. Okay, there is a particular coast of Iran that is called the Makran coast. So there is a coast of Iran that is called Makran coast, and this coast is something which is actually shared with Pakistan as well. So Makran is basically a region that actually lies along the Gulf of Oman. Okay, this lies along the Gulf of Oman. Now with respect to this particular port, Chabahar, so this Chabahar port is basically located in such a strategical position that it has very close proximity to one of the most important trade routes of the world, and that is basically called the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so this basically lies just beyond it. Okay, and this is a very important and strategically vulnerable entry point of India towards Afghanistan and Central Asia. So let us discuss this with respect to geography, with respect to the interest of India, and with respect to other developmental plans for the region. Okay, so this is basically the Chabahar port, which is currently under construction. That is something you can see with respect to this tower crane and a tower which is building up, and this is exactly how the port is. Okay. So what has recently happened is that there was a particular act that was enacted in the United States of America in 2013. A part of that particular act was Iran Freedom and Counter Proliferation Act. Okay, so this was basically a part of a larger act which was established in 2013. So under this particular act, there were actually legal sanctions, okay, that were imposed upon Iran by the United States of America. Okay, so this particular act that you are seeing, okay, this is basically an act of or a legal act of the US. Okay, so one of the players that we have established here is the United States of America. Okay, so they in 2013 they enacted this particular act, okay, a part of which was actually called the Iran Freedom and Counter Proliferation Act. Okay, so based upon this particular act, there were sanctions. Okay, there were sanctions which were legalized, okay, in the United States of America. Okay, so why these sanctions have been legalized? Because in the perception of the United States of America, Iran is one of those countries which has been very relentlessly in the pursuit of development of nuclear weapons. So all the kind of nuclear material that it can access, it is alleged by the United States of America that it is used for enriching purposes of making a nuclear weapon. Okay, and there are two primary reasons to drive this concern. Okay, one, when you talk about Iran, so Iran as a country wanted to modernize, and because of this particular modernization, the ruler of Iran before 1979 envisaged that there will be a petroleum free economy or petroleum independence of Iran. Iran basically is one of those countries which has basically got a very huge reserve of petroleum with itself. Okay, but the ruler of Iran, he envisioned that one day the petroleum of Iran as well as for the world is going to go out. And if Iran is only and only focusing on this particular petroleum as its primary stay or primary product of the economy, this is too bad. So in order to modernize it, he basically wanted that Iran should become independent of petroleum, and for that he wanted foreign companies to come in and set up nuclear power plants. Okay, so subsequently there were a lot of companies from Germany, France, USA who basically were invited. They came in, actively developed the infrastructure of Iran with respect to this nuclear power plants, but all of a sudden the monarchy was overturned by the 1979 Iranian revolution. So what you are seeing here is basically a phase which is called pre-1979. So in the pre-1979 times, Iran basically was a friend of the United States of America. Okay, so after the 1979 Iranian revolution, what basically happened was that the Shah of Iran was overthrown and a new regime was established. Okay, now in this particular regard, what happened was that all these nuclear power plant infrastructure and the nuclear reactors which were installed there, now they basically became a site for enrichment of uranium. I will be telling you a bit about it in a few slides. Okay, so basically what happened is that because of the presence of these nuclear power plants, there has always been a suspicion that Iran has been building up or stockpiling uranium, okay, for its nuclear weapon. Now the second thing, Iran is basically the primary you can say rival of Israel. So Iran and Israel, okay, they basically don't see eye to eye. They both are very closely attacking each other. They are very suspicious of each other, and they continuously sabotage each other's facilities, military facilities, their intelligence facilities and all. Okay, so Iran and Israel, they actually have a very great kind of animosity between them, and subsequently because of this, what happens is that Iran would want to be ready for any kind of attack that comes from Israel. And as of now, what we are seeing is that Israel basically is one such country which is attacking all the locations across the Western Asia or from the US side, which is called as Middle East, to eliminate the Hamas and its negotiators. Okay, and now this is what exactly has prompted the second news article as well. Okay, so coming back to this discussion, so because of two things, Iran basically has got nuclear infrastructure, and the US is suspicious about nuclear weapons being developed, okay, or the probability that it can develop in the future. The second thing, Israel is a close ally of USA, and subsequently USA would want that Israel should be safeguarded in all the parts. So that is why we basically see that these are the two things that are actually driving the USA to be so hard on Iran. Now, because of this, what has happened is that USA has always wanted to check the intentions of the Iranian regime. So that is why USA says that if you have nothing to hide, why don't you open up your nuclear facilities to the international watchdog, which is called the International Atomic Energy Agency. Okay, so that is called IAEA. So USA says if you have nothing to hide, let them enter, let them investigate, and let them come out with a report. We are going to agree to that report. Okay, so this is basically the international watchdog. International watchdog for atomic energy. So because Iran continuously denies access to the IAEA representatives towards its nuclear facilities, it is always presumed that Iran has only one motive with its nuclear power facilities, and that is not nuclear power but rather the enrichment of uranium. Okay, so that is why in order to coerce Iran, USA has actually imposed sanctions on Iran. Okay, so sanctions basically mean that there will be very high kind of taxes, or you can say customs that are going to be imposed on those individuals who first of all trade with Iran, and second, all those who basically are trading with Iran and then trading with USA. Okay, now the point is that USA does not want to buy anything directly from Iran. But the second thing is that USA may be purchasing certain things from other countries which are sourced from Iran. A simple example would be that Russia is basically one such country which is currently boycotted by all the European nations because of its actions in Ukraine. But at the same time, Russia is also the country which is right now providing a heavily discounted price of oil to India. India processing this particular oil is in turn selling this oil to all the countries in the world. Okay, so that is why what USA perceives from this is that even though Russia is not directly dealing with any of these countries, it is basically because of the countries like China and India that the oil trade of Russia is basically the one which is sustaining the war. And that is why there is a rhetoric with the US that it is actually you can say being funded by countries like India. Okay, and that is why anything that is opposed to the US intentions, objectives or interest, it basically is seen as adversarial. Okay, that is the whole reason why we are also having crippling tariffs that have been imposed over us. 25% of additional tariff of USA has been imposed on us because we are dealing with Russia with respect to our oil. So in order to discourage us from buying oil from there, USA has imposed a 25% additional tariff over India. Okay, now this is something which is one of the highest tariffs that USA has actually imposed over any other country. This basically has made India's exports too expensive for USA customers, and subsequently we have lost a lot of orders, but we still are reeling under that particular stress and we are trying to find a way out. Okay, in a similar fashion, USA has also done this with respect to Iran, but at a much bigger scale. So with respect to Iran, they have a proper act. Okay, and in this particular act there were certain exemptions. Okay, there were certain exemptions. So I'll just be telling you the exemptions. So under the Iran Freedom and Counter Proliferation, okay, Counter Proliferation Act, (2012) or 2012. Okay, so why is it counter proliferation? Because it would want, USA would want that Iran should not be able to access nuclear weapons technology at any cost. Okay, so spread of nuclear weapons technology is what is actually called as proliferation. Okay, so if the proliferation is stopped, so what are the measures to be taken to stop it? Those are the sanctions that we are talking about. Okay, so under this particular act there has been exemption that has been given. Okay, there was an exemption from tariffs or from sanctions. Okay, now this was something which was given for the reconstruction of Afghanistan and subsequently providing humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. Okay, so in both these situations what has happened is that it is Afghanistan which is the beneficiary, but this beneficiary is basically being discussed with respect to Iran, because Iran and Afghanistan share a border. Okay, so in this particular regard, the activities which were actually intended for Afghanistan's reconstruction or its humanitarian aid, they will be exempt from the sanctions. Okay, now that is what was given, but the power, okay, the power to grant this exemption, power to grant exemption was with the president. Was with, I will be writing the short form, President of the United States of America, POTUS. Okay, this is basically the official designation in the abbreviated form, okay, for the President of the United States, POTUS, POTUS. Okay, so this is more of an acronym. If you don't know it, you can even Google it and you will be finding the same thing. Okay, so now it is the president who can be giving exemptions to such sanctions to those activities which actually are related to the reconstruction of Afghanistan and humanitarian aid. And in this entire effort, what has happened is that India was basically a beneficiary. Okay, India was the beneficiary of this particular thing. How exactly is India a beneficiary? Because India becomes a beneficiary because India uses a particular port from Iran to supply humanitarian aid relief material to Afghanistan, and that port is Chabahar. Okay, so through the Chabahar port, India basically routes all its relief material, all its personnel, okay, any kind of infrastructure or hardware requirement of Afghanistan, so that it could be held for reconstruction of Afghanistan. Okay, so that is exactly how this particular equation had worked till date. But recently what has happened is that the United States of America and the president in particular has actually revoked this particular exemption. Okay, so they have said that from 29th of September 2025, the exemption that was granted under this particular act, Iran Freedom and Counter-Proliferation Act 2012, they will be abolished. So from now on, any particular individual who is either operating Iran's Chabahar port, it is financing that Chabahar port, or providing any kind of services to that particular Chabahar port shall be open for sanctions. Okay, and this is exactly the pain point for everyone. Okay, so I hope now this background is clear. Now let me go towards what exactly is the Chabahar port and why is it so important. Okay, so Chabahar port, first of all, with respect to the geography, it lies in the Gulf of Oman. Okay, and it is very close to this neck point, if you are able to see. Okay, this neck point is something which we actually call as the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, this is basically called the Strait of Hormuz. So Strait of Hormuz, first of all, let me write that down. Strait of Hormuz. Okay, it connects the Persian Gulf, to Gulf of Oman, and subsequently to the Indian Ocean via the Arabian Sea. Now when we talk about Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, they basically are arms of the Indian Ocean. Please remember this. Okay, So if I tell you directly that okay, we are gaining access to the Indian Ocean via the Gulf of Oman, so it is implicit that Arabian Sea basically is a part of Indian Ocean, so we are referring to it as a whole. Okay, and via this particular Indian Ocean, now from this particular Indian Ocean, what happens is that the shipment now moves via the Suez Canal. Okay, via the Suez Canal to Europe. Okay, and at the same time via this Indian Ocean it also comes towards Southeast Asia. And from Southeast Asia there is another very important strait that we will be also looking at with respect to the South China Sea, that is called the Strait of Malacca. Okay, very important strait again. So these two straits, Strait of Hormuz and Strait of Malacca, with respect to international trade, two of the most important trade routes are these two. Why? With respect to Strait of Hormuz, okay, almost 75% of world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, because at that particular point what we have is that all the countries, okay, that are actually located via the Strait of Hormuz and towards its west, we find that all these countries are oil rich economies. Iran, Iraq, we have Oman, we have Bahrain, we have Saudi Arabia, some of the major exporters of crude oil to the world, and this is the choke point. Okay, now the second one, when you talk about the Strait of Malacca, so via the Strait of Malacca almost 70% of the global trade takes place from this particular strait. 70% of the global trade. Very important choke point, and both of them are very critical for the entire global economy to function. Okay, now the third choke point here is basically the Suez Canal. Okay, so all of these things actually get related together. Okay, now the next thing, because this particular port lies to the east of Hormuz, okay, so this is something which is lying to the east of Hormuz at this particular location. So what happens is that even if for some reason there is any kind of blockage that comes here, any ship gets wrecked, any kind of geopolitical tension that may flare up across these particular borders, so what is going to happen, even if that is the case, this port will remain operational. Okay, so at least for Iran, this is basically the port that will remain operational, and because of this what is going to happen, that this port could be used by Iran as well as by other countries, okay, to route their things. Now with respect to this particular choke point that you are seeing here, there is another very important port of Iran, that is called Bandar Abbas. Okay, at this particular point we have Bandar Abbas, and it is the busiest port of Iran. Okay, so Bandar Abbas is basically the busiest port of Iran. But what basically is the issue? That first of all it is busiest, so it would need some kind of you can say relief. Okay, there needs to be some kind of relief to this particular port. So busiest port of Iran. And the next thing is that this is something which is located right at the choke point. Okay, so if anything is the first target for any kind of adversarial tactic towards Iran, that will be shutting off the Bandar Abbas port. And this is exactly what actually happened between the Iran-Iraq war, okay, in the 1980s. So at that particular time what happened was that the Bandar Abbas port was targeted by the Iraqi forces, and subsequently Iran understood the importance of Chabahar. Okay, now the next thing, when you talk about Chabahar, Chabahar is something which is very closely located to another very important port of the region, that is called Gwadar. Okay, now both of these ports, Gwadar as well as Chabahar, both of these ports are located on the Makran coast. Okay, the only difference is when you talk about the Gwadar port, it is basically being developed under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor by China. Okay, so it is basically developed by China as a deep water port. Now with respect to the Chabahar, now Chabahar is being developed by India. Okay, I hope this is something which is clear at the first sight. Now the second thing, when you talk about Chabahar, so Chabahar basically is located at a geographically feasible location which is very close to a lot of busy ports. On one side it has got Dubai, on the other side it has got Gwadar, it has got Karachi, it has got Kandla, and it has got Mumbai. Okay, these are some of the busiest ports that are actually there in the region, and they are all located in close proximity to this particular port. So this basically means that the Chabahar port can serve as the transit point, it can also serve as a repair point, and at the same time it can also be an access of India to various parts. And this is exactly why Chabahar port is important for us, because via the Chabahar port, we basically have opened up an alternate route to reach the golden gate of Central Asia, that is Afghanistan. Okay, so remember this when I tell you that when we talk about Afghanistan, okay, so Afghanistan is also called the golden gate of to reach Central Asia. Okay, so when we talk about this particular thing, we have to understand that access to Afghanistan has been a difficult thing for India. Why? Because India basically has been using Pakistan's land-based route to cross into Afghanistan. Because these countries are connected by land, so it basically means a feasible option, and at the same time roughly a smaller distance, because as the distance increases, so does the fuel cost, and when the fuel cost increases, so does the price of your product. So you would want to reduce the amount of time that is required to deliver your consignment. Second, you would also want to economize on the way that you are going to deliver this particular thing. You do not want to you can say use additional amount of cost or unreasonable amount of cost for transportation. But what has happened is that Pakistan is not so friendly with India. So Pakistan does not allow its territory to be used by India for transshipment of consignment to Afghanistan, and subsequently that is why India basically taps the Chabahar port for this. Okay, so when we talk about the Chabahar port, now with respect to the entire engagement, the objective is that from Chabahar port, okay, we take up a railway track. And we reach a border town of Afghanistan which is called Zaranj. Okay, we reach a border town that is called Zaranj, and from Zaranj we basically have a highway that actually connects us to Kabul. So this is basically the way in which, first of all, the exports of India flow. This also is the way through which our imports flow. Now with respect to Afghanistan, there is a particular place which is called the Hajigak Mines. Okay, there is something called the Hajigak Mines which are there in Afghanistan, and these are some of the biggest iron ore mines of the region, especially Asia. Okay, now with respect to the Hajigak mines, the lease for exploiting the iron ore reserves here has been given to the Steel Authority of India Limited. But in order to do that, we need to have any kind of transportation system set up. That's where we have the Chabahar port coming up. Okay, the next thing, it also helps us balance the influence of China in the region. Okay, so when we want to discuss the story of Iran and you can say Chabahar port, so what basically happens is that in 2003, okay, in 2003 the first agreement was signed between India and Iran. Okay, first agreement between India and Iran. So this particular agreement was about the development of Chabahar port, because now Iran has also understood that it is Chabahar which needs two things. Okay, for Iran, the development of Chabahar port means two things: relieving pressure from Bandar Abbas, that's the primary thing. Okay, relieving pressure from Bandar Abbas. Now the next thing that is very important for this particular region is that this particular region, okay, the region of Chabahar port, that is basically located in the Sistan Balochistan province. Okay, Sistan Balochistan province of Iran. Now this is basically a very highly underdeveloped region. Okay, there is very high underdevelopment, And because of the underdevelopment, what also happens is that this is also the region where there is a very high amount of unemployment. Whenever there is unemployment and there is underdevelopment, there breeds rebellion, there breeds crime. So in order to provide meaningful employment to the youth of the region and at the same time also countering the problem of underdevelopment, we basically have this Iran's objective of Chabahar ports development. So for the first time, India and Iran signed a kind of this agreement in 2003. But at this particular time, US President was George W. Bush. Okay, but George W. Bush the junior. Now you would be surprised why I am mentioning this, because there was also George W. Bush senior who was also the President of United States. So George W. Bush Jr. is the one you have seen in the news after you can say the 9/11 attacks. Okay, not a very you can say a good reference, but the point is that you have seen that face especially after 9/11 attacks. Okay, so George W. Bush Jr. basically he defined three countries. Okay, these three countries were Iran, North Korea and Iraq as the axis of evil. That these are three countries which are axis of evil. Okay, and subsequently from that time onwards there has been sanctions on Iran. So despite the agreement that was signed between India and Iran in 2003, this did not fructify. Why? Because India was already a very close ally of USA. And why did this happen? Because when 9/11 happened in USA, on the same year in December we had Indian parliamentary attacks, and India had been warning the entire world that we need to strengthen or militarize our borders, we need to strengthen our capabilities against the rising terrorism that is being sponsored from the soil of Pakistan. But till the 9/11 thing happened, there was not such a great amount of inclination toward this particular objective of India. But after 9/11, once the links were established that this entire region of Afghanistan, Pakistan is where these terrorist organizations are actually functioning, and at the same time they are also you can say recruiting their personnel. So at that particular time, India and United States have started coming up with an even more closer alliance. Okay, and that is when they actually become strategic partners. So this is the conundrum for India, that we are actually moving towards a strategic partnership for with USA, but at the same time we also are interested in developing this Chabahar port. Okay, now for India I have already told you the Indian interest here is to first of all help Afghanistan. We have been very close ally of Afghanistan. Okay, so 2003 this was something which was done. But then subsequently, because of this axis of evil definition and a lot of geopolitics that happened in this particular time, nothing significant was done. Okay, then comes the moment of 2016 when all the countries rise above their fears. Okay, so with respect to India, we see a regime change. Now we have the NDA coming to power with Prime Minister Narendra Modi leading the country. Okay, from the side of Afghanistan, we have Hamid Karzai. Now at this particular time, Afghanistan basically had a democratically elected government. Okay, and this is the president of Iran. Now they all sat together in 2016, and in 2016 a trilateral agreement was signed. Okay, so trilateral because we have three parties to the agreement. So they signed an agreement committing the development of Chabahar port, and from the Chabahar port now the transshipments are going to go to Afghanistan. So Afghanistan basically will be given the access to give its exports to the world via Chabahar port, and at the same time this will also be the port from which India is going to push in the relief material and exports of India to Afghanistan. So in the entire sequence, what is happening for Iran here, it is getting two things. First of all, development of a port from a country which is a friend of USA, and at the same time it is a country which is having credentials of building things with trust. Okay, the second thing, it will also be earning a significant amount of revenue because of this trade exchange, because it is the one which is facilitating it. So that is basically the whole point of having this particular port built up. Okay, so in 2016 basically India said that we are going to commit, okay, for the development of Chabahar port. There were several things that were actually to be done. Okay, So first of all, there should be modernization of the port. Okay, modernization of port basically means that we have to rebuild some of the berths, we have to rebuild the port so as to augment its capacity. The second thing, installation of new equipment. Installation of new equipment. Okay, and the third thing was basically the increase in berths and jetties, where basically the ships actually get docked for capacity augmentation. Okay, so these three things were needed, and that is why India said that we are going to give you 80 million US dollars in investment. 80 million US dollars in investment, and then subsequently another 120 million line of credit. Line of credit basically means when you need this particular loan, you can ask it and that will be given to you from the Export Import Bank of India. So that is Exim Bank. Okay, so that's the thing. This is what was the agreement that was given in 2016, and based upon this, what happened was that Chabahar ports, one of the port, here we have two different ports. Okay, first one is called Shah Kalantari. Somewhere you will also be finding Shahid Kalantari, that's fine. Okay, and the second one is Shah Beheshti. So with respect to India, India basically was given the developmental opportunity for Shah Beheshti. Now this is basically the one which will be developed by India. So all the investments of India are actually focused here. Okay, so we are doing the port modernization operations here, we are augmenting the capacity here. Okay, so this was basically the thing. Now in 2018, India basically gets the operational rights. Okay, so India becomes the operator. For Shah Beheshti port. Okay, and since 2018, it is India which is actually doing this particular operation. Okay, so for this entire setup, there was a new company that was set up, that was called India Global Ports Limited. This was basically a venture between Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust and Kandla Port. Okay, and this is something which operates under the Ministry of Shipping. Okay, so this particular company was incorporated, and this company is the one which is right now developing, installing equipment and also operating the Shah Beheshti port. Okay, that is in short called IGPL. Now in 2024, India and Iran renewed their contract. What they had signed in 2016, they now renewed their contract with a 10-year long-term engagement, where IGPL is going to take over the complete operations of the Shah Beheshti port, and at the same time now there will be renewed investment for Shah Beheshti. Okay, so now in 2024 long-term agreement. Okay, so in this particular long-term agreement, there were two things. The first thing was that India basically, IGPL will invest 120 million US dollars for port development. This was promised. Okay, now the second thing that was promised was that there will be additional line of credit. additional line of credit of US dollars 180 million. So in all, if you see what exactly has been the investment of India and the pledges of India, in 2016, India basically promised $80 million of investment and 120 million line of credit. So 80 plus 120 gives you $200 million of investment or investments and commitment. Here you basically are promising $120 million of investment and another $180 million for line of credit. Okay. So I will just summarize it for you. Investment and line of credit. So 80 million. Okay. In 2016 we had 80 million. In 2024 we have got 120 million. Okay. Line of credit that was actually promised was 120 million in 2016 and 180 million in 2024. So in all, there is an investment of 200 million US dollars and there is a promise of $300 million worth of loan. So total economic exposure of India with respect to this particular port is 500 million US dollars, of which $200 million of investment and $300 million of pledge of economic support. So this is the economic exposure of India with respect to this particular port. And that is why the sanctions that have recently been announced for the Chabahar port, or the you can say the Chabahar port, this is exactly the biggest concern for India. Okay. Now, why exactly is it so important? So when we see the geography of this particular region, we see that Iran shares a border with Afghanistan. Okay. And Afghanistan basically has a border with these countries, which are collectively called the Central Asian region. Okay, once upon a time they were basically a part of the Soviet Union, but after the disintegration in 1991, they basically became independent. So we have Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. All of these countries are actually called the Central Asian Republics. Okay, they are called the Central Asian Republics. Okay, in short they are also called as CAR. Okay, CAR. This region is called CAR. Now, what exactly is important in this particular region is that this region is rich in natural gas. Okay, this is rich in, Kazakhstan has been a major supplier of uranium to India. Okay, at the same time, all these countries are Islamic. Okay, these countries are Islamic and aspire to be democracies. Okay, and that is why one of the biggest concerns of India is the spread of fundamentalism here, either because of the proximity to Iran or with the proximity to Afghanistan or with respect to Pakistan. So that is why India actually engages with them wholeheartedly, so that the youth here, the people here are invested in development and progress. They do not want any kind of radicalization coming from this particular end, because that is going to wreak havoc for the internal securities infrastructure of India, because this is only going to increase the threat perception. Okay, so instead of having a stable region, now it will become a very, very volatile region. Because when it comes to destabilization, fundamentalism, radicalism, terrorism, so what basically happens is that it knows no boundaries. On one end we have got Russia, on the other end we have got Iran, third end is China, and then we have India. At least here India, Pakistan, China and Russia are all nuclear enabled, even if we leave out Iran for now. Okay, although we shouldn't, but still. So the whole point being, if any kind of destabilization happens here, that will have a the entire region would be the one which will be destabilized, and India will also be facing a brunt of this inadvertently. So that is why it is very, very important that this region be focused for development. Okay, and then this uranium reserve and the natural gas reserve, one of the biggest of which is actually in Kazakhstan. Now they are of primary interest to all the economies of the world, especially the Western democracies. Okay, so that is why this particular region is so important. Then at the same time, this region also is the region where India can have its exports diversified. So India basically wants to use the route of Afghanistan, Iran, Afghanistan, and from there it basically goes into the Central Asian countries. So 3 Central Asian countries directly: Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. Then via Iran, using the Caspian Sea, we can reach Azerbaijan, and from there Kazakhstan as well. So Caspian Sea is basically the biggest landlocked lake in the world. Okay, so that particular lake has got boundaries with the Central Asian region as well, and this is something which is also becoming a very important transit route for us. Okay, so this is something from which we can reach Kazakhstan, and subsequently we will also be using this. We'll be seeing this how we are using it for Russia as well. Okay, so that is why there are connectivity plans in this particular region for India. Okay, so what basically is the objective here is that from Mumbai and Kandla, okay, the things are going to be shipped to Chabahar. At Chabahar, after the disembarkation, what is going to happen is that there has to be a railway line that needs to be built between Chabahar and Zahedan, and this particular railway line is currently a work under progress. It is expected to complete, okay, expected to be completed in mid 2026. Okay, and subsequently then what is going to happen is that after the operationalization of this particular railway link, now there will be the movement of goods from Chabahar to Zahedan, and from Zahedan there will basically be a network of highways that is going from Iran to Afghanistan via Zaranj, Delaram, and subsequently reaching to Kabul. Okay, so this entire region is something where India has been very heavily investing, and to your surprise, even Afghanistan is even Taliban is right now protesting these investments because they serve as vital links for Afghanistan to access the Indian Ocean, and at the same time also to access the humanitarian assistance that is actually sent by India. So that is why Taliban has been very cautious that India's investments and India's interest must not be hampered in Afghanistan. Okay, so that is something which has come out as a pleasant surprise for India as well. So this is basically the current plan, but because of the imposition of the sanctions that are going to kick in before on 29th of September, what is going to happen, the development of this port and at the same time the material requirement for the development of port as well as these railway lines are going to face enormous amount of pressure, because most of the suppliers will not be supplying this, because if they do, they will also be exposed to sanctions and no one would want their business to be hampered. Okay, so that is another cause of worry. Okay, then we have something which is very special which is coming up, and that is called the International North-South Transport Corridor, okay, INSTC. Now this is basically a corridor which was planned between Russia, Iran and India in 2002. So these were the 3 countries which basically wanted to connect with each other, okay, via a multimodal transportation. So this is basically a multimodal transportation initiative. Basically it means that it is something which will be having the utilization of railways, roadways and waterways. So that is why multimodal. Okay, and then water as well. How exactly is this happening? This is going to connect JNPT, which is there in Mumbai, Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust, with St. Petersburg in Russia. Okay, and this particular route is going to go from Mumbai to Iran, from Iran to its northern coast, which is basically in Caspian Sea. Okay, so that is basically the Caspian Sea. From the Caspian Sea taking a waterway towards Astrakhan, and from Astrakhan that is basically going towards Moscow, finally ending up in St. Petersburg. Okay, so this is basically the route that has been under progress. Okay, and India has tried really hard that we basically should be including Chabahar instead of Bandar Abbas. So original plan actually included Bandar Abbas as the port, but now India's with respect to the India's insistence, even Chabahar port is basically used for this particular purpose. With the sanctions getting imposed, now this INSTC's integration with respect to India is in a limbo. Okay, why? Because India is not will not be able to, if it is not able to connect with this Chabahar port, okay, then what is going to happen? This entire international north-south transport corridor is something which will again come back to a halt. Okay, so currently what exactly is the route? So currently the route is that from Mumbai we basically take the route from Red Sea. So this is basically the Red Sea. Okay, from the Red Sea there is a very important canal here, that is called the Suez Canal. Okay, and from the Suez Canal we basically move into the Mediterranean Sea. So this is basically the Mediterranean Sea that we have. Okay, from there we basically have, this is called the Strait of Gibraltar. Okay, from here we basically move to Atlantic Ocean. From here we move to Atlantic Ocean, and from Atlantic Ocean we basically move into, this is basically the British Isles, so this is the English Channel. So from the English Channel we basically move towards, you can say via Baltic Sea, we move towards the St. Petersburg. So this is the current route. It takes a lot of days and a lot of money. Okay, about 40 days is the transit time, and that too when the Suez Canal is not blocked. When the Suez Canal was blocked, okay, in the recent past, we saw a great amount of time that was taken for this entire route to be taking place. Okay, so in order to completely avoid this, we would want to take a route via Iran. So that is basically the international north-south transport corridor, and this is something which will become a very unfeasible choice for India if this is not something which is going to be, you can say, operationalized. So what exactly have we seen? What exactly are the implications? First of all is the economic exposure. It's very large. Okay, economic exposure about 500 million US dollars. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, okay, that would be the slowdown in the exports. Why? Because now you are already under the you can say the concept of tariff. Enhanced tariffs have already been applied by USA, one of your largest export markets. Okay, the next thing that we are going to see is basically non-integration. Non-integration with the INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor. That's the third thing. Okay, so these are going to be the most important of the reasons. The next one, which is more strategic. Okay, increasing influence of China. Increasing influence of China. In what sense? In the sense of Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, BRI initiative, which is basically you can say one of the initiatives that China is actually building up with a lot of different countries, BRI. So China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is actually a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The second one is basically the expansion of CPEC in Afghanistan. Okay, so even the Afghanistan is getting involved in the CPEC now, and subsequently this is basically the one that is actually going to be increasing the influence of China in the region. Further, China gains access to Indian Ocean. It gains access to Indian Ocean via Gwadar port. Okay, so China as of now does not have any access to Indian Ocean, but now it will gain access through Gwadar port, and subsequently that is going to increase the competitiveness, okay, of the Chinese goods. So that is why this is something which is going to also impact our exports. So these are basically the implications for India apart from the sanctions that would be you can say applied. Okay, now what exactly can India do in order to avoid this? So it is very important for India to first of all secure its own interests. Okay, but what to do in that particular case? So the first thing that we can do is move away from dollar denominated transactions. Okay, move away from dollar denominated transactions. So this is something which we are also doing with Russia. With Russia, we have something called the rupee ruble agreement, where the payments are made either in rubles or in rupee, completely eliminating the role of dollar in between. Okay, so that is one thing that could be done in order to circumvent the transactions or circumvent the sanctions. That's the first thing that could be done. The second thing that needs to be done, okay, is to evaluate alternate routes of trade, because we cannot be stopping our trade. That's a very important thing that we need to do. So we have to evaluate alternate route for our trades. The third thing, okay, that will be basically seeking exemptions on humanitarian grounds for Afghanistan. The same thing, that we need some kind of exemption for Afghanistan. Okay, humanitarian aid for Afghanistan. Okay, the next thing that could be done is basically the fourth part, and that is going to be the concept of you can say having some kind of arrangement with the compliance as well. So here basically all the consignments to Chabahar can be subjected to strict compliance control. So basically it means that India can also refuse the through IPGL we can also refuse handling of certain kinds of cargo. Okay, subject to strict compliance. So this is basically done in order to reduce the exposure of sanctions over the India Ports Global Limited. Okay, out of which the long term things would be first and second. These are the long term solutions. The next two are short term solutions. Okay, because exemptions on humanitarian grounds are the ones which were the mainstay of this entire pact. Okay, and because this was something which was revoked by the USA, so it is going to be a very tough deal to crack. Okay, but regardless, let us see what happens. Okay, so this is basically all about the Chabahar port. Now let us move towards the next important part, and that is strategic mutual defense agreement that has been signed recently between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this is basically a snapshot from that particular point. So Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have entered into a mutual defense agreement, which basically says that both the countries are now going to be responsible for providing security to each other. So it means that any kind of aggression against either of these countries is going to be treated as an aggression against both, something that we have seen with respect to NATO. Okay, so North Atlantic Treaty Organization is basically one such organization which has this particular clause of mutual defense. Okay, this basically is known for its mutual defense, that if any kind of attack is done against any of the NATO member, that will basically be considered as an attack against the alliance, and subsequently all the members of the alliance are expected to send their troops and at the same time their weapons in order to reciprocate, or you can say retaliate, against the aggressor. A similar agreement has been signed by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, where mutual defense basically means, and this is the most publicized part about it, what exactly is the mutual defense. Okay, this means any act of aggression against either countries will be treated as an attack against both. Okay, and subsequently it will be retaliated or responded to by both. Now this is something which is a kind of security for both of these countries. Okay, now why exactly is it a security for both of these countries? Let's discuss that. Okay, so for Pakistan, when we talk about Pakistan. Okay, so for Pakistan, there are three benefits that are actually there with respect to this particular treaty. The first benefit after this particular treaty, okay, so for Pakistan, Saudi promised 6 billion US dollars as investments and deposits, okay, as loans and deposits to Pakistan. So technically it becomes the biggest financier of Pakistan. That is something which is a much needed respite for Pakistan, that you are getting some amount of money. Now this particular money Pakistan intends to use to modernize its military. Okay, so the entire intention to use this money, okay, this is for modernization of Pakistani military. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, the second benefit for Pakistan in this particular regard is the sale of weapons, including nuclear weapons. That is what has been said by the Pakistan Defense Minister. Nuclear weapons to Saudi. Saudi Arabia as of now is already the largest importer of Pakistan weaponry. Okay, so I'll write that here as well, that Saudi is already the largest client for Pakistani weapons. Okay, the third thing that basically is achieved with respect to this particular pact is a kind of diplomatic deterrence. Diplomatic deterrence from India. Now this is basically a leverage situation. Okay, this is a leverage on friendly ties between India and Saudi. So India and Saudi Arabia basically have got very warm and commercial ties between the two countries. Okay, but now with this particular pact in picture, now what is happening? Any kind of aggression that may come from the Indian side in the form of Operation Sindoor or some other future operations, now at that particular time, Pakistan believes that this is going to make India think twice before taking such a step, because now it will also be responded to under the agreement by Saudi Arabia. So because India does not want to deteriorate its relations with Saudi Arabia, India will somehow be deterred. So without even saying that India basically is impacted by this, this is something which is made clear. Now where exactly the threat comes from? When Pakistani Defense Minister says that now the nuclear weapons of Pakistan will also be made available to Saudi Arabia. Okay, now this is where you can say a kind of threat basically comes towards India, but nonetheless, because Saudi Arabia has a very good ties with India, we do not worry about it. Now with respect to Saudi, okay, what exactly would be the benefits for Saudi? Okay, so Saudi basically has signed this particular agreement on the backdrop of the Israeli hits or Israeli attack in Qatar. Okay, so recently what has happened is that Israel basically executed an airstrike in the capital city of Qatar, that is Doha. Okay, now Qatar at that particular time was hosting a delegation of the Hamas. Okay, now Hamas is basically the aggressor which started the war with Israel in 2023, but now it is the Palestinians who are actually you can say bearing the brunt of this. So what has happened is that in order to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, even USA is actually trying to work out a deal between the two, and that is why Hamas has sent a delegation of negotiators to Qatar. Okay, now Israel basically targeted that particular delegation, and in this particular attack one of the Qatari security personnel was also killed. Okay, so now this is basically a blatant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar, and at the same time Qatar is also a very important ally of the USA. So now this basically puts USA in a peculiar position, that on one end it basically is getting attacked at the largest base in Middle East, that is basically in Qatar. So Qatar basically has got the largest American base in the West Asia or the Middle East, and on the other side it has got Israel, which is the seasoned partner of USA. So Israel could only do this because it had USA on its side, that USA basically has always supported Israel. So that is why this is something which was executed. Okay, and this is something which also was said with respect to the press release, and subsequently even President Trump agreed to it, that okay, eliminating Hamas was a worthy objective, but the actions are regrettable. So in that particular manner, what is actually happening is that it is seen that USA is right now pivoting towards Israel, and that is why Saudi now sees that it is important to secure the defenses with weapons and personnel, and that's the whole objective of getting this deal done with Pakistan. Okay, so now with this particular deal, Pakistan has also made two other maneuvers. The first one, that it has actually invited other countries in the West Asia to join this particular pact, and at the same time Pakistan has also tried to figure itself as the net security provider of the Islamic world. Okay, so in this particular regard, Pakistan basically is trying to get some amount of centrality with respect to this pact. Okay, but the reason behind that is actually Israeli attack on Qatar. Okay, so that is basically the whole concept here. Apart from this, Saudi Arabia basically has always been an age-old ally of Pakistan as well. Okay, now when we talk about the defense cooperation between Saudi and Pakistan, this is not a new thing. This has been going on for a long time now. Okay, so Saudi troops are trained, advised, and operationalized with Pakistani consultancy. Okay, so Pakistan basically provides these three things: training services to the Saudi troops, advisory services on how to organize national security, and operationalized using the you can say the equipment that is there with Pakistan. That's the first thing. Then at the same time, Pakistani pilots or Pakistani Air Force has trained the Saudi Air Force. The Royal Saudi Air Force. Okay, now that is the next thing. Their defense cooperation has been a long thing in the past. Okay, both of these troops, they basically coordinated in 1979. Okay, during the seizure of the Grand Mosque of Makkah. Okay, this particular mosque was actually taken hostage by a particular group from Saudi Arab, and it actually called for an Arab revolution to demolish the Saudis. Okay, Saudi basically is Saud. Saud is basically the family that actually rules Saudi Arabia. So they basically called for the overthrowing of the Saud by taking over the Grand Mosque of Makkah, and the all the worshippers who were actually present at that particular building, they were actually taken hostage. So this particular Grand Mosque operation was coordinated by Saudi Arabia, and Pakistani troops helped. Okay, and subsequently after this, the military cooperation has deepened. So that is why this particular defense agreement that was there in development, this did not come as a shock for India. India was already in the know of these things, that such a defense cooperation is actually being worked out between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and subsequently this did not surprise India. Okay, so that is why India only is maintaining a hawkish stance with respect to watching the moves that are being taken up for this particular thing. So we have already discussed the benefits for Pakistan as well as Saudi Arabia. Now when we talk about the implications of this particular pact, now they are something which are significant. Okay, now with respect to Pakistan, so Pakistan's primary benefactor is China. Okay, Pakistan's benefactor is China. Now this basically means that after this particular pact, China becomes the chief source of military hardware. Okay, it becomes the chief source of military hardware because most of the things that even Pakistani army uses actually comes from China. And if China becomes the chief source of military hardware, it is something which will be trained by Pakistani forces. Now this becomes very, very convenient for China to actually expand its defense footprint. Okay, why? Because it is basically the manufacturer of this hardware, and subsequently the training is basically provided by the Pakistani forces, which have a link, cultural or religious link, with the Saudi Arabia forces. So it becomes easy to push through the exports via Pakistan. And that is how what we see is that this is going to be, you can say, increasing Chinese influence in the region again. Okay, this has also prompted another thing with respect to the US. We will be talking about that now. Increasing Chinese influence. Okay, so this particular move has already been anticipated by the USA, and the USA, because of this, what exactly is the USA doing? It is right now demanding the recapture of the Bagram air base in Afghanistan. Okay, so it is right now demanding that the Talibani government in Afghanistan, they should be handing over the control of Bagram air base to USA. Why? Because this particular air base is in close proximity to the Chinese nuclear weapons facility. So USA basically wants to again re-establish its base here so that it can have a surveillance mounted over China and subsequently Pakistan. Okay, and that is why they are very, very vehemently demanding this from Afghanistan, to the point that even they are threatening that if Afghanistan does not give it to them, then bad things are going to happen with Afghanistan. Okay, so this is basically the potential fallout, apart from the security threat on India, that India will also have to take more nuanced approach towards resolving the problems with respect to Pakistan. Okay, because right now we see that China and Pakistan already had a close alliance. Now Pakistan is extending it with one of India's closest friends in the region. Okay, so now this becomes a little more tough for India to maneuver, but nonetheless India basically is one such country which has always found a way out. Okay, so that is why when we talk about India's relations with Saudi Arabia, so they are mostly cultural. Okay, so they are mostly cultural and commercial. Okay, with respect to cultural, that is the pilgrimage. So with respect to cultural, there are tourism and the Hajj pilgrimage. Okay, which is basically the pious pilgrimage journey of the Muslims. Okay, that is called Hajj. So these are the two things. Okay, with respect to commercial, you can say relations, we basically have got, you can say trade relations, investments on both the sides. Okay, and subsequently also a very, very important development partner of India with respect to redevelopment of Kashmir. Okay, redevelopment of Jammu and Kashmir is basically being partnered with Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is extensively investing in Jammu and Kashmir's redevelopment. Okay, with respect to trade investment, India and you can say India and Saudi Arabia, basically they are one of the largest trading partners of each other. Saudi Arabia's second largest trading partner is India. India's fifth largest trading partner is Saudi Arabia. Also, we have a booming trade with respect to oil. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest company named Aramco. Okay, Aramco is world's biggest oil producer company. Okay, this is basically a company from Saudi Arabia. They basically are investing in a Jamnagar refinery. Okay, Jamnagar refinery of Reliance India Limited. Okay, that basically belongs to Reliance India Limited, and subsequently that will be the biggest oil refinery of India. So India and Saudi Arabia, we have very good relations. So that is why there is nothing to fear about with respect to India and Saudi Arabia on the relations front. Yes, with respect to defense, our relationship is very nascent. Okay, so our relationship is not very you can say close as compared to Pakistan on defense front, but on other fronts we are very important for Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is a very important destination for a destination as well as investor in our own country. Okay, so that is basically India's relation with Saudi Arabia. Now moving on to the next part, the South China Sea dispute. Okay, so when we talk about the South China Sea dispute, this is one of the geopolitically most complicated dispute that is actually there in our neighborhood. Okay, now South China Sea dispute is going to be there throughout the year with respect to various kinds of confrontation that usually happen, and predominantly it will involve the Chinese. Okay, and subsequently there will be some other country which is actually going to claim or allege any kind of harassment from the Chinese forces. Okay, so this particular news is basically based upon the way in which there was a collision between two ships, one which belonged to the Chinese Coast Guard and the other one which belonged to a Philippine fishing trawler. Okay, so they basically both collided, and because of this particular collision, both of these countries actually blamed each other for this action. Okay, for Chinese it was a deliberate move by the Filipino ship to actually ram into their Coast Guard ship, and for the Filipinos they basically said that it was the Chinese ships that actually started using powerful water cannons over the ship, and that is what dragged the ship towards them, and subsequently it also injured one of its crew. Okay, so that is basically the controversy in between them, and this controversy basically happened near Scarborough Shoal. Okay, now this Scarborough Shoal is basically a location which is located in the South China Sea, and it is contested as a territory between Philippines on one side and China on the other side. Recently, China has also declared the Scarborough Shoal as a part of its national natural reserve, which is again vehemently opposed by Philippines. So these are basically the news with respect to the South China Sea. So this is not exactly the picture of the operation that happened, but this is basically how the water cannons actually are being used over the ships. So this is basically, if I have to tell you, this is something which is pretty apparent that this is the Coast Guard ship from China. So this is Chinese Coast Guard ship. Okay, and this is basically a Filipino resupply ship. Okay, and this is basically sent to a very important disputed site between China and Philippines, that is called the Second Thomas Shoal. Okay, now Second Thomas Shoal is something which comes within the territory or exclusive economic zone of Philippines, and that is why Philippines stakes claim by having a manned outpost there. So in order to get the supplies refilled there, this ship was sent, and subsequently when this ship was sent, it was actually harassed by the Chinese Coast Guard. So what you are seeing is basically the deployment of water cannons over this particular ship. Okay, so this was something which was actually captured on record, and now even this is something which is a very common confrontation between Philippines and the Chinese. Okay, so this is basically the Scarborough Shoal. Okay, and this is basically one of the contested regions between China and Philippines. Okay, now what exactly are the disputed claims in the South China Sea? So when China actually became the People's Republic of China in 1949, Okay, when China became People's Republic of China in 1949. So at that particular time, it actually came out with a claim. Okay, it came out with a claim, and this claim was on South China Sea, which is called the 9-dash line. Okay, so 9-dash line basically in this particular figure is actually represented by this red line. Okay, so basically China says that all the regions which fall within the 9-dash line, that basically belongs to China. Okay, now what has happened is that in the past there have been war between China and Japan. Okay, and that has been basically on the control of Korea. North Korea and South Korea, both of them they were combinedly called Korea. Okay, so at that particular time the Japanese forces had defeated China. So when they had defeated China, so the Chinese had to cede this territory of Taiwan that actually was called Formosa. Okay, so Taiwan is also called Formosa, and that is why this particular water body in between them is also called the Strait of Formosa or the Taiwanese Strait. So this was actually given to Japan. Now after World War II, what basically happened was that Japanese surrendered because of the you can say defeat and the atomic bomb explosion that happened in Japan. And subsequently after that, it was decided that whatever have been the territories that have been taken by Japan during the wars, they have to be returned back to the rightful owners, and subsequently Taiwan was returned back to China. But then by then Taiwan basically had begun having a different feeling as a nation instead of being a you can say a part of China. As of now, officially Taiwan is not recognized as a separate country, and China stakes claim on Taiwan. But yes, most of the countries actually have separate relations with China and Taiwan. Okay. Now the next part about it is that within this claim of the 9-dash line lies all the disputed areas. The Scarborough Shoal, which actually forms a part of the exclusive economic zone of Philippines. The Spratly Islands, again, which is contested between Vietnam, China, Philippines and part of Brunei and Malaysia. Okay. Then there are Paracel Islands, which were once occupied by Japan. Okay. Now they are a contested region between China and Vietnam. So that is why we see that in all of these contested claims, there is one common you can say contestant, and that is China. Now this is something which is actually having, on the other side they may be having the relations, one with Vietnam, the other side we have Malaysia and Brunei, then at the same time we have got Philippines, and then on some regions we have got Taiwan. So this entire region has been militarized on a lot of different fronts. Okay, so because of this, what has happened, that first of all China actually is using its military might in this region. Okay, now this particular region basically has seen a confrontation, okay, naval confrontation have happened between China and Vietnam. Okay, so between China and Vietnam, this is something which has happened on the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands. Okay, then at the same time we have the military naval confrontation between China and Philippines. Okay, that was basically with respect to the Scarborough Shoal, and because of this you can say naval confrontation between China and Philippines, the defense relations, okay, defense relations between USA and Philippines were revived. Okay, so now this is all a matter of territory. Okay, and what has happened is that in the past it has been seen that China did not control a lot of these particular things in the recorded history, but China claims this entire region based upon long past, and that basically it calls as the West Han dynasty. Okay, that is something which ruled in the times of ancient India. Okay, between 200 before Christ to 9th century Common Era. Okay, at that particular time a particular dynasty used to rule here. That is basically what China says, and there is no you can say written evidence that it willingly produces, and it says that this entire region was basically a part of that. A claim highly contested. Now, Paracel Islands were basically the ones which were actually invaded by Japan. They were actually invaded by Japan and they were returned to China after the you can say the World War II. Okay, but the point is that Paracel Islands were never a part of the Chinese territory. Now at the same time, when you talk about Vietnam, Vietnam says that we have had our jurisdiction on both Paracel Islands and Spratly Islands. Okay, but what basically happened is that when China became you can say the People's Republic of China in 1949, at that time Vietnam was divided in two different zones. Okay, the southern Vietnam and the northern Vietnam. So it was the southern Vietnam which basically had one of its bases in Spratly Islands. Now this particular base was the one which was overturned by Chinese, and the Chinese took claim of this particular Spratly Islands base. So subsequently they moved towards the south part of the Spratly Islands. So when you talk about the Chinese claim, they are here in Paracel Islands, they are here in Spratly Islands, and this is something that they contest. Now why exactly all these things matter? Okay, first of all, this particular region, okay, this particular region that you are seeing here was the first evidence of good amount of oil. Okay, crude oil reserves which were actually estimated to be found in the East China Sea, very close to Taiwan. Okay, so that was the first thing. The second thing, that you have a particular island in Philippines that is called the Palawan Islands. Okay, so in its northwestern basin, Philippines in 1976, it found that there was an enormous reserve of oil. Okay, so this particular region is known for an enormous reserve of oil, and at the same time it is also known as a very rich fishing ground. Both of them are extensively important for a country's economy. Okay, so that is why these regions are so hotly contested. Okay, so now we are going to see a certain pictures of how exactly these particular things have looked like. So when you talk about the South China Sea, so this is the South China Sea. Okay, this region is South China Sea, this is the East China Sea. Okay, and both of these regions have estimated that in both these regions we have both crude oil and natural gas. Both of them are estimated to be of great importance and in great quantity as well. Okay, so that is the thing. Now one more very important thing is that there is the connection. There is a connection to the Indian Ocean on one side and there is the Pacific Ocean on the other side. Okay, so these regions get connected like this, and there is a very important strait here, and that is basically called the Strait of Malacca. Very important. Okay, so what basically happens is that all the things that actually are getting produced in the you can say the Americas, they basically are shipped towards India via this particular site, and at the same time whatever is produced here actually goes to the other side via the South China Sea. Apart from that, we also utilize this particular route to reach Russia. Okay, from this route we reach Russia, Far East Russia, Vladivostok. Okay, so that is why this particular region is very important. Okay, so this is the South China Sea, and you can see all the you can say the countries which are involved here, which have got their coast here. Okay, so with respect to the countries which have got coast, we have Vietnam, we have China, we have Philippines, we have Brunei, we have Malaysia, Indonesia. Okay, these are the countries which have got their coastline here. Okay, Thailand does not have a coastline here. Thailand has a coastline in the Gulf of Thailand. Okay, now this all dispute basically comes from some of the definitions that have been given under the United Nations Convention on the Law of Seas. Okay, so basically what it says is that all these water bodies are actually interconnected. Okay, you talk about Indian Ocean, you talk about South China Sea, you talk about Bay of Bengal, you talk about West Philippine Sea, East Philippine Sea, East China Sea, they are all interconnected bodies of water. There is no distinction of water flowing from one region to the other, and you cannot stop it. But the point is that if it is a you can say these are all interconnected, there has to be some amount of restrictions that need to be put in by the countries in order for economic exploitation. Okay, so there are two things. One thing is that the water bodies are actually a common inheritance of the entire humankind. And the second thing, even if they are the common inheritance of the humankind, they are not equitably shared. Okay, only those countries that have got a coastline, they basically have this particular access to the common resources. What about the countries which are landlocked like Bhutan? You talk about Nepal, Afghanistan, Central Asian republics. Okay, so they are not having any kind of you can say access to water. So how can that be managed? So in that particular regard, we basically have got the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas. Okay, so this particular you can say international treaty actually determines the limits of the territorial jurisdiction of the countries with respect to the seas. Okay, so there is one part of the sea where they have territorial jurisdiction, and there is another part of the sea which is basically considered to be the common inheritance of the humankind. Okay, so the first thing that they understand is that there has to be land, okay, which basically touches the sea. Okay, so that basically means that we need to have a coastline. So that coastline is actually taken as the baseline, and from there the measurements are taken towards the sea. So from the coastline towards the sea, the first 12 distance of 12 nautical miles. Okay, the first 12 nautical miles is something which is called as the territorial sea. Okay, so this is basically the region which is completely under the control of the country whose coast it is. Okay, so basically it means that all the laws of this particular country actually are applicable here. Everything which is present within the water, like fish resources, economic resources, anything that is here, that belongs to the country. If any ship, any international aircraft wants to enter this particular region, they will have to seek permission from the country. Okay, so that is why it is called as national airspace. No one can breach without any kind of you can say permission. Okay, now beyond this particular territorial sea, another distance of 12 nautical miles, which technically is 24 nautical miles from the from the coastline, we basically have the contiguous zone. Okay, so in this particular region, you cannot be actually stopping international airlines to fly. You cannot be stopping international container ships to actually go through. So this is basically the region where you can be having something called innocent passage. So innocent passage basically means that you do not have any kind of weapons aboard. Okay, and subsequently you are not a defense warship. A private cruise, a container ship, international commercial flights, they can fly over this particular region. You do not have to take the permission from the country. But everything that lies within this particular zone, whatever it is, whatever of economic importance, this is basically the thing that comes under the jurisdiction of the country. Okay, then now from the coastline or the baseline, a distance of 200 nautical miles is something called exclusive economic zone. So exclusive economic zone basically means that you have economic sovereignty. Okay, you have economic sovereignty of everything that is actually found in this entire region. Okay, so whatever is actually here, okay, that basically belongs to you. Okay, but the point is that beyond the distance of 12 nautical miles from the baseline, you cannot be stopping ships, you cannot be stopping commercial aircrafts to fly. Okay, now this particular 200 nautical miles region is something which is very important, because this actually gives you a large part of the ocean where you can actually you can say establish artificial islands, you can be establishing research observatories, you can be taking up a mineral exploration, fishing expeditions. That is all what can be done. Okay, now the point is that this is something which actually gets enhanced when you have got islands. So when you have got islands as your territory and that is recognized as a sovereign territory of yours, your exclusive economic zone increases. and subsequently what happens, your region for exploitation also increase. And that is the whole point, that all these countries are actually fighting for the territorial position of these particular islands. Why? Because that is going to actually give them you can say extensive access to the resources. Okay. Now all the region beyond this 200 nautical miles is basically called high seas, or this is something which is called as the area beyond national jurisdiction. Okay, national jurisdiction. So this basically means that in this particular region, no country can actually claim any kind of territorial sovereignty. This particular region is supposed to be free for the entire humankind. So this is beyond the control of any country, and subsequently this is basically the region which is going to be free for any kind of movement. So from here the defense warships can cross, no one can object. From here all the kinds of defense you can say air force planes can cross, no objections. But within this zone, anything that is done with respect to defense and military thing, you have to inform that particular country, and with respect to commercial things they can go. Within territorial sea nothing can go without permission. Okay, so this is basically the entire concept with respect to the United Nations Convention on Law of Seas, and all the countries, okay, in the region of South China Sea want to abide by this definition, but at the same time getting access to those islands will be key to expanding their exclusive economic zone. So that is the primary objective of all the countries there. Okay, so that is why there is so much of tussle that is between them. Now at the same time there also you can say stands an agreement. Okay, there is also an agreement between China and the ASEAN nations. Okay, so ASEAN basically means Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Basically these are most of the region nations which actually bound the South China Sea. So there is a agreement between these two about peaceful resolution of all the territorial disputes and a lawful implementation of the things in the South China Sea. But as of now there has been nothing in the you can say in the realm of a binding code of conduct in between these two parties. So China continues to harass the other you can say forces and other countries with its own naval might. Okay, and because of that, this is what you actually see with respect to the you can say the various islands here. So Woody Island is basically the largest island amongst the Paracel Islands. Okay, so this is something which has been staked by China already. China already has established its you can say its territorial possession here. Then this is basically the Mischief Reef where the Chinese occupation was done, and this was basically one of the first sites of confrontation between Vietnam and China. Okay, so it was basically here that 3 of the Vietnamese ships were actually sunken by China. Okay, then the Philippines at the Scarborough Shoal. So this is something which actually is the portion where Philippines is also trying to establish its territory, because this is something which comes within the exclusive economic zone of Philippines. This is something which was also affirmed by the United Nations Convention Law of Seas and the Permanent Court of Arbitration. But this particular thing was not taken up by China. It has not acted upon it, and that is why Philippines has established its own manned outpost here. This is basically the Spratly Island that is administered by Vietnam. Okay, so this is basically this is the Spratly Island by Vietnam. Now this is basically one of the Paracel Islands which have been militarized by China. So this was the initial construction. Now there are you can say air defense systems that have actually been mounted here. Okay, this is basically another militarized island at the Woody, which is the Woody Island, the Paracel, which you were seeing as the first picture. This is basically how it looks like. So there is an airstrip and subsequently there is a naval base here. Okay, this is the Fiery Cross Reef, again something which is currently controlled by China, and this is again the same. You can see that this is also a deep naval base and subsequently an airstrip, completely militarized with a helipad as well. Okay, so this is basically how you see that all of these countries basically are trying to militarize this entire region, and subsequently they would want to have more and more possession of these regions. So that is all about South China Sea dispute. How exactly India gets involved in this? Because India lies in close proximity. India basically has been a net security provider for Indian Ocean region, and at the same time India would want stabilized trade routes throughout the world. That is also the you can say the objective of Japan, that is the objective of USA, that is the objective of Australia, and subsequently all the countries which want the trade to grow. So everyone is actually wanting China to agree to a binding code of conduct and subsequently remove all these kinds of military endeavors that it is actually taking in these regions. Okay, so I hope all of these things are clear for the day and you could understand all of these things together. So if you have any doubt, please let us know. Please comment and let us know what exactly do you want more to be improved, and subsequently what more topics do you want to be explained, and subsequently we'll be working upon that. So till then, read this, take your notes, find it in the description with respect to the Telegram channel, subscribe to that as well, and never miss an update. So thank you, take care.